Sometimes it doesn't begin with an explosion, not with a siren, not even with a fiery speech on the steps of a parliament building. Sometimes it starts when the sky itself forgets to be blue, when dawn refuses to arrive, when a nation accustomed to living under threat realizes too late that this threat is no longer just a threat. It is the new reality. In those pre-dawn hours when Tel Aviv still clung to the illusion of safety, something ancient and inevitable was already rising beyond the horizon. They knew it would happen eventually, but no one, absolutely no one, believed it would begin like this. At precisely 4:01 a.m., the first air raid sirens shattered the hush. Less than half a minute later, the first impacts rumbled through concrete and glass, a blunt announcement that a different era had arrived. In that moment, every prediction collapsed. What was supposed to be sporadic hostilities turned into a calibrated hurricane. Over 300 projectiles, rockets, kamikaze drones, decoy flares swept the sky in a choreography so precise it defied comprehension. Infrastructure, apartment blocks, military compounds, nothing was spared. By the 6th minute of this new reality, the Iron Dome itself had become a metaphor, a defense system overwhelmed by volume, ingenuity, and sheer intent. One after another, rockets found the spaces between interceptors, slipped through the cracks in doctrine, and declared a brutal truth. Israel's most formidable shield had limits. In the suburbs of Tel Aviv, the darkness flickered with the glow of burning rooftops. Herzliya, Bat Yam, Ramat Gan. These names became the coordinates of dread. Residential towers scorched, neighborhoods left in a haze of sirens and smoke, and when the city thought the worst was over, the sky above Haifa erupted with a new silhouette. Medium-range ballistic missiles traced their arcs overhead, their destinations unguessable. A single warhead slammed into an industrial zone near the port, detonating fuel storage tanks. The blaze was so intense that rescue workers donned respirators, unable to breathe the poisoned air. Environmental agencies sounded alarms. Carcinogenic plumes would soon drift wherever the wind chose to carry them. And, as firefighters clawed for control of the inferno, Iranian state television calmly broadcast live footage of missile launches. No attempt to deny, no effort to pretend this was anything but a deliberate spectacle. A uniformed commander appeared on the screen, his face expressionless, as he promised this was just the first stage, and the next would hurt more. Half an hour later, Shia militias in Iraq declared their own participation, lobbing volleys from the outskirts of Kirkuk. From Yemen, Houthi spokesmen claimed responsibility for drone squadrons crossing 1,000 kilometers of airspace to strike southern Israel. It happened in an hour. Just 60 minutes to erase the pretense of containment. Analysts on Al Jazeera called it the most synchronized proxy offensive in the region's recent memory. For the first time in years, Iran's entire web of allies moved in unison. And the most unnerving part? This was merely the prelude. Reports surfaced that within 72 hours, a second wave was likely, this one featuring hypersonic missiles Iran had only unveiled 2 months earlier. Inside Israel, the psychological fracture was immediate. People slept in stairwells, afraid the next blast would find them in their beds. Schools suspended classes indefinitely. According to the Times of Israel, more than 700,000 civilians fled their neighborhoods. Trains halted. The Tel Aviv Stock Exchange froze trading. The government disappeared into an emergency bunker compound, its exact location undisclosed. But even that retreat did nothing to steady a country reeling from a sense of exposure so complete it felt surreal. Hospitals ran out of beds, doctors pulled 36-hour shifts, and, in a gesture not seen since 1973, the IDF ordered the full mobilization of all reservists. This was no longer an escalation, it was a national alarm, a transformation of the ordinary into a permanent emergency. And while soldiers scrambled to man batteries and cordon off impact sites, a silent specter gathered strength in the north. Hezbollah, for days conspicuously absent from the battlefield, began to signal its readiness. A spokesman told The Guardian that they were waiting for a single command, a word that would trigger a simultaneous barrage. Satellite images captured convoys of rocket launchers moving closer to the border. Evacuations commenced across Galilee. You have to ask yourself, when does a nation know it is at war on all fronts? When the shells fall. when the streets empty, or when even hope begins to evacuate itself. Southward, Gaza and Yemen launched waves of drones, machines that were no longer the improvised hobby kits of earlier conflicts, but purpose-built, military-grade weapons, designed in Iranian factories to penetrate radar screens and exhaust interceptors. CNN reported that the attackers had refined a formula: cheap decoy drones to swamp detection grids, paired with guided kamikaze models to take out radars, and thermal reconnaissance craft to live-stream targeting data. The Iron Dome was never meant to track 1,000 unpredictable trajectories. A senior air defense officer confessed on Channel 12, "We did not know where to fire. There were too many. Some of them weren't real. Others were more real than anything we'd seen." In Ramla and Ramat Gan, small drones carrying charges no larger than a suitcase hit civilian structures, an apartment tower, a substation, the main entrance of a hospital. Symbols, all of them, that the red lines of safety had disappeared. From Yemen, a long-range drone named Samad 5 flew the entire length of the Arabian Peninsula, striking the Eilat region, a feat no previous adversary without an air force had accomplished. But more than the technical audacity, it was the scale and simultaneity that turned this into a template for something no defense doctrine was prepared to absorb. As Israeli batteries burned through interceptor stockpiles, protests ignited in Tel Aviv. Citizens demanded the immediate deployment of Iron Beam, the laser defense system still in trials and years from readiness. Military commanders offered only resignation. No lasers were coming. For now, there would be hand-aimed guns and round-the-clock alarms. Yet, in the middle of this unfolding chaos, I want to ask you directly, do you think Israel will stand alone forever? Do you think the alliances of the past can survive the realities of today? If you find these questions as unsettling as I do, subscribe to this channel now and click like so more people can follow this story as it evolves. Because what comes next is anything but predictable. Even as air defense crews struggled to hold the line, analysts warned this aerial siege was simply a curtain raiser. In Gaza, Hamas fighters massed for synchronized ground incursions. At dawn, units stormed border fences under artillery cover. At least 70 fighters breached the perimeter. The IDF repelled the assault but paid in blood. 8 soldiers dead, 19 wounded. Telegram channels soon flooded with videos of Hamas gunmen clashing with Israeli troops inside kibbutzim, proof that the myth of an impenetrable fence had collapsed. From Yemen, ballistic missiles, Burkan types, rained on southern Israel. One hit an airfield near Beersheba, wrecking runways and grounding aircraft. Meanwhile, drones targeted fuel terminals in Eilat, disrupting supply lines. In Iraq, Kataib Hezbollah units fired volleys toward the Golan Heights, some intercepted, others exploding on roads and pipelines. No single front, no single enemy. Only a lattice of adversaries orchestrated in Tehran. As the hours passed, the Israeli military faced an impossible math. Every border demanded reinforcements. Every minute birthed a fresh emergency. Yet Hezbollah still waited, its arsenal untouched, its forces shifting silently among the hills of southern Lebanon. Satellite photos showed convoys hauling Zelzal rockets and Shahed drones into forward positions. In an address rare for its clarity, Hassan Nasrallah declared, "If Israel strikes Tehran again, our rockets will fly faster than the wind." The Israeli High Command understood this wasn't a bluff. In the north, 90,000 civilians were ordered out of range. Schools closed, emergency hospitals opened, Iron Dome batteries repositioned, Patriot missiles deployed. Even armored brigades returned to the frontier, steps not seen since 2006. And yet, the fear wasn't of one cataclysmic barrage, but of a doctrine of simultaneous saturation strikes on dozens of targets, designed to fracture the Israeli response beyond repair. You must wonder, is Hezbollah holding back to await an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities? Are they waiting for Iraq to ignite a third front? Or is this the rehearsal for a war of attrition that will never formally declare itself? While Tel Aviv seethed under rockets, the country's political seams split open, protests swelled in the avenues, former prime ministers condemned the government's paralysis, Hashtags erupted. Calls for resignations, for elections, for any sign that the center could still hold. For the first time in decades, Israel's reliance on international guarantees looked less like strategy and more like an illusion. And even now, as the missiles fall and the alliances fray, a deeper, unspoken question festers. Can any nation survive a siege from without if it fractures within? If you've stayed with me this far, I invite you once again. Subscribe, like, and stay alert. Because in the coming hours and days, what you think you know about this war may be overturned completely. What if this isn't just the latest flare-up? What if it is the threshold of a conflict that will redraw alliances and rewrite the rules? What if the sky itself, once a shelter, has become the domain of terror? And what if Israel, for the first time in its modern existence, has no choice but to stand alone? And now, as the dust thickens and the hours stretch long beneath blood-red horizons, something even more dangerous begins to unfold. Not in the skies or on the ground, but in the shadowed corners of diplomacy and public perception. Because wars are not only won or lost on the battlefield, they're won or shattered by silence, by hesitation, by the absence of voices that once thundered with conviction. For the first time since the formation of the modern Israeli state, the traditional alliances that once shielded it in moments of crisis are flickering like candlelight in a storm. The United Nations calls for peace, yet offers no deterrence. European leaders speak of de-escalation, but avoid naming aggressors. And the United States, Israel's staunchest historical partner, has chosen the language of distance, a formulaic affirmation of Israel's right to self-defense, followed by a refusal to engage in regional entanglement. Behind closed doors, anxiety tightens around every decision. U.S. strategists, bruised by the legacy of Afghanistan and Iraq, whisper warnings of another forever war. Meanwhile, supply flights land in Israeli air bases, filled with ammunition, radar systems, anti-missile batteries, but no troops, no military presence, no visible pledge. The weapons arrive, but the will to use them does not. And isn't that perhaps the new form of abandonment? The illusion of solidarity delivered in crates and pallets, while the real war is fought not with hardware, but with resolve. Within Israel itself, a different war brews, an internal collapse of cohesion, loyalty, and belief. The military demands action, but the government hesitates. Protesters flood the boulevards of Tel Aviv and Haifa, not in celebration of resistance, but in mourning for unity. A former prime minister calls this not a failure of intelligence, but a failure of vision. Opposition leaders whisper of snap elections. Rumors swirl of fractures within Netanyahu's cabinet. Generals leak frustration. Soldiers on the front lines speak anonymously to foreign journalists, confessing that they are exhausted, directionless, and underprepared. How long can a war be sustained when the battlefield stretches into every synagogue, every hospital, every heart, and yet the missiles keep coming? On the night of June 25th, a new barrage crippled critical infrastructure. Power grids collapsed in Ashkelon. A railway line in Haifa was reduced to twisted metal. Jerusalem's light rail ceased operation entirely. Gas stations ran dry. Hospitals began operating on backup generators. Entire cities dimmed. The blackout wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The lights went out not just in buildings, but in people's trust, in their confidence that someone, somewhere, was still in control. More chilling still are the reports emerging from the periphery, glimpses of what might be the next phase. Intelligence services intercept chatter, suggesting coordinated cyber strikes are underway. Banking systems slow down inexplicably. A national hospital records a mysterious malfunction of its emergency alert system. Is this random, or is it the slow poisoning of infrastructure by an enemy that doesn't only aim missiles but malware? Meanwhile, in the north, Hezbollah still does not strike. Their arsenals remain aimed but silent. Their vehicles are in motion, their commanders issuing cryptic statements, but the rockets have not yet flown. Why? What are they waiting for? Some believe Iran is holding them back as a final card, to be played if Israel retaliates against Tehran's nuclear facilities. Others argue that the northern front is already compromised, ready for activation at a moment's notice, simply waiting for the clock to strike. A third, darker theory proposes that Hezbollah is delaying to maximize psychological decay, that the anticipation of war, like a blade held to the throat without striking, is in itself a form of warfare. And so every hour that passes without that strike becomes its own form of terror. In Beirut, the divide deepens. Protests erupt simultaneously in support of Palestinian resistance and in furious opposition to Lebanon, being dragged into a conflict that could destroy what little remains of its economy. Food prices have doubled. The Lebanese lira spirals into worthlessness. Any further involvement in the conflict could bring full economic collapse, and yet Hezbollah does not rely on public approval. Its loyalty lies not with the streets of Beirut, but with the corridors of Tehran, and that makes its next move not a question of if, but when. And still, the fires rage in the south. Drone after drone, rocket after rocket, test Israel's limits, and no matter how many are intercepted, the ones that land are enough to drain morale, to exhaust resources, to break routine. People do not know whether to go to work or to shelter. Children do not know when school will resume. A nation once famed for its resilience now shows signs of emotional erosion. The warning sirens no longer elicit panic. They elicit fatigue. The population is fraying, and the enemies of Israel know this. They are not rushing to deliver a final blow. They are slowly tightening the vice, watching the cracks spread. And yet, amid the ruins, amid the fury, there is a darker undercurrent, one that many refuse to voice, but that must be asked. Has Israel reached the limits of unilateral defense? In a world that is shifting away from unipolar order, where alliances are transactional and principles are fleeting, can a small but powerful nation hold its own when the global consensus begins to evaporate? Will Washington ever send troops again? Will Europe ever risk its own capitals for Jerusalem? Will the West continue to posture, or will it act when the red line finally burns? And perhaps the most painful question of all, if this war spirals into a full-scale regional nightmare, who stands with Israel, not in theory, not in tweets, but in trenches? If you've come this far, you understand what's at stake. This isn't just a battle between nations. It's the collapse of an era, a shattering of assumptions, a breaking of trust in the very structures that promised never again. If you value this kind of raw, unfiltered perspective, if you think these questions must be heard, then please subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, and comment your thoughts below. Because silence favors the aggressor, and attention, your attention, is the only thing they fear. So tell me, how do you think this ends? Not just the war, but the world we thought we lived in, the alliances we assumed were forever, the balance we thought was stable. Do you still believe it can be restored? Or are we witnessing something far more permanent, something that won't just rewrite history, but erase it entirely?